And you said anecdotes plus evidence plus training is the key in
Mm.
this nutrition field, in this wellness field. And that just really hit home for me.
That hits home for me. I'm like, "That is so smart." No, that really that hits home deeply for me. That hits home deeply for me. Yeah.
Because that's really kind of what we're all after, right? Whether we're trying to lose weight, gain weight, I feel like this day and age, it's like I need to know what works for me. I need to get some kind of personal experience, some kind of assimilation. But also, I don't want to just be throwing a bunch of spaghetti up against the wall when it comes to my health and my life. Like, I need some kind of evidence backing that up. So, how do you kind of blend anecdotal and evidence to help us make better decisions in our
Well, I
health?
think the other thing that I'm pretty obsessed with is how quickly we give away our power when it comes to food and weight. And I mean, we are, especially those of us who have been in this diet drama and trauma. And it's like a really cute phrase, but if you really look into it, like so many of us actually have like actual significant traumatic experiences from engaging in dieting. And so I think. And I think many programs are designed for us to give our power and stay in the system and not graduate from the system. And then I think there's a whole new breed of people coming out, which are coaches who have a personal experience that worked for them, and then they make a decision that that will work for everybody. And then there's, I mean, a lot of shame, there's a lot of victim shaming going on. There's just a lot. It's just a lot. I um i did a consultation with someone in my practice, and one of the questions I ask is like, what are you looking for in a coach? And she's like, I just don't want somebody to like shame me and berate me. And I was like,
Oh,
um,
wow. So
love
she
bug?
had that experience probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, so first of all, fire that person. But I think this is in how much of our power we've given away, and we're not even like thinking about who we're asking to help us. We're not even really looking at the data in which we're going to be engaging and trying to create a new relationship with food. It's I'm hoping it's almost at an endpoint where there's just one of these big cosmic shifts where everybody just decides to like step up and take back their power. I'm very into people finding their own path and being a guide. I'm also about that because that's like literally the only piece of science that has any legitimacy. So what's really interesting about my field is that there's not one thing that works. It's fascinating, right? Like some people are sugar addicts and might, giving up sugar might be the best thing for them. Some people have been through such a traumatic space in eating disorders that they should be intuitive eaters. Like I don't, there's so many factors that contribute to all of it. There's biological factors, emotional factors. It just like, that's its own podcast, right?
Yeah, yeah, it really is.
But and, and I think people are jumping into this pretty uninformed. The one piece of data that we know works, and this is kind of the clip of it all, right? Is self determination, is when we decide for ourselves what we know is going to work. That's the thing that sticks. And then I just have to say one more thing about this. And then you can ask me some questions.
I love it. Go. Yeah.
But the really crazy thing about food and diet culture is that your relationship with food is ever evolving. And diet culture doesn't support that. Like the relationship I haven't had sugar and flour. Next on Tuesday, it'll be like 12 years since I've had sugar and flour, right? That is not what I was doing 12 years ago, isn't what I'm doing now. It's like
Hell no.
the
No.
relationship you're in, it's always evolving. And it's not evolving in this like, for me, it's not evolving in this like biohacking like way that it is for many, but it's just different. I would never have thought I could eat some of the foods I eat today. I have a much more relaxed relationship with it. It's just better. So I think those are the two pieces that we lose sight of. And so I want to make it clear, actually, breaking up a sugar could easily be a diet. I mean, there's a billion people telling you to do a sugar detox, and then no one's talking about what to do on day 8 or day 31. And that's where I think the dangerous piece. So I think, anecdotes and experience alone does not solve a problem. Just doesn't.
What is it about sugar that has, I'll say, kind of fascinated you to not only pivot in your nutrition, and you just said you haven't touched it in 12 years. And I know this is a big part of, it's the crux of your work, really. Is sugar really the bad guy we have it out to be? Why is sugar such a big part of your work in your personal life and in your practice?
Yeah. I mean, Let me tell you, last house on the block, and I didn't even wanna live there. Like, I'm not I didn't give up sugar by virtue, I gave it up by necessity, So, like, if someone was like, "Hey, it's a total con," I'd be like, "Yes, let's get the Krispy Kremes." Like,
She's like, "I'm back."
I'm not like, I wasn't in it for, like, the health game, Like, I was just like, it's like I'm a total and complete sugar addict. So, it is, and I think the longer I'm doing this work and, like, I've worked with just, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and I think, actually the longer I work with people, the more impressed I am by it because I'm sort of like signed, sealed, delivered. Like, I know it doesn't work for me. I know I have an addiction. The way that addiction goes, like, I stopped eating sugar and flour. My life got, like, significantly better in every single way. I think what I'm really fascinated by are things like when I treated someone with MS and her symptoms reduced by 80%.
No shit.
Or like I have a client now who, and many of us who struggle with eating disorders, it goes to your teeth and your gums. And she has to get like all of her teeth done. And the dentist is like, wow, your gums are healing so much quicker than I anticipated. What's your diet like? And she's like, yeah, I don't eat sugar. And the dentist is like, oh, that's the whole thing. I mean, that's the whole thing. So there's this, so number one, there's not a part of your body. So here's the other thing. So here I am saying, one thing doesn't work for anybody, right? But there's literally like nobody's saying sugar is good for you, right? That's actually the only thing that we can all agree on. Like some people can
True,
use it
yeah.
recreationally, some people can have a cupcake here and there, but no one's like, yeah, like all sugar diet, great idea.
Yeah, like, "Did you
I
hit your
think,
sugar quota today? Make sure,
right? Did you get
8
the
ounces of
macros in
water,
on that
8
one?
grams of sugar?" Yeah, not so much.
Believe it, believe it. So I think, like, that's the piece of it. What I actually think is fascinating is and there are people way more qualified to me to talk about it, but the sugar industry is a lot like the tobacco industry, right? There's a lot of secret underground, gnarly
Uh-huh,
stuff that's gone on.
uh-huh.
So I think the more awake we're becoming, the more we're seeing, like, just some really simple stuff, right? It's an inflammatory. The way that they're making it now is to make you want more, like the big food stuff is off the chain of how they're, what it's doing to our children. I mean, it's just endless. So I hate to demonize, but yeah. And I think the other thing I want to say is in my own personal experience, I gave up sugar. I broke up with sugar. I was running a clinic that was what I was trained in for weight loss, right? I was trained in very low fat eating, counting calories, like writing it down, like all this very rigid, very eating disordered stuff, frankly. And I was, turning some of it, but I switched my clinic in a minute. I really did. I like came into work the next day and I had all these people that kind of like weren't getting well or were gripping on with their lives like I was. Like, I know, and I was an eating disorders therapist, like binging at night, like living this like double life. I like couldn't stop eating. I had had bariatric surgery that I'd eaten through and I was like gaining weight. I mean, it's a vibe, you know?
It's a vibe, she
It's a
says.
vibe. And like, and then I gave up and then I broke up with sugar. And this is what I mean about anecdote versus research, right? So I started to get better. I started to do some of the research. I found a mentor and I was like, oh man, blind spots are incredible. Cause like I just didn't, sugar was always my solution for so long that I was just so unwilling to see. It was like I didn't know about diabetes and I didn't know about metabolics and I knew about all of it. I just didn't want to look at it. And yeah, so what I found was really interesting too is that when I started to bring a harm reduction food addiction model into my clinic, it was like everyone else started getting well too. It was like bonkers. Like it was like,
What
yeah.
what were you doing there? What were kinda some of the next steps? I mean, you walked in and what? And did what?
I walked in and I had like mini interventions with everyone. Like, so here's the problem. And we've been not looking at it the right way. You know, I have such a investment in the work I do. Like, and one of my core values is really like evolve or die. And if better science comes out, then I'm going to go with better science 100% of the time. Like, they say, like, save your ass, not your face. It's like, I'm here to help people. So if something better comes around, and I think in that way, it's really, I've been learning a lot about all of this stuff, and I'm always learning. And then it was starting to inform people about not just how to give up sugar, because again, like that is a diet, right? It's really the difference between a diet and a really formidable formidable change is a shift in what you choose to believe. Like, and I think that's why I think of it in like a relationship perspective, because you have to be in a relationship with food. Like, there's no avoiding that. Like, so I think it was the other piece of it was about getting out of that rigid diet stuff that it wasn't helping anybody get better, always had an endpoint, included things like cheat days. Like, what a mess. And just getting people into these like loving, sustainable and relationships with food, and getting what I also find for myself and others is like that when you take that approach to it, the other relationship you end up healing inadvertently is with yourself, because you start to do all these lovable, esteemable things, and like then you're like, oh wow, whoa, I can trust myself. Like, that's whoa, what a miracle of science, you know?
Can you expand on that for me, please? Because I know a little bit, of your backstory and how that worked for you, but I think that's such a great concept for somebody to really pick up on right now is that when we improve the relationship we have with food, when we become fully aware and improve the relationship with our diet, kind of the ripple effect it has for the relationship with ourself.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I think, I worked at, I started a therapeutic boarding school many years ago. And when we were doing some of the concepts of it, everyone's like, yeah, but they're just 16. And I was like, yeah, they're 16 and they've probably been on a diet since they were 12. So that means a quarter of their life they can associate with failing at something. And like, Chase, like, that's going to do something to your personality, like straight up,
No
you
doubt,
know?
no doubt, yeah.
And so I'm dealing with, people in their 50s and their 40s. It's like, so multiply that, multiply that. So there's this underlying belief, and it's like in the behaviorism world, we call it learned helplessness, where you just have these fundamental beliefs that you cannot get well, that you are unreliable. I mean, the core beliefs that people come to me with they're heartbreaking is what they are. It's the only word I can use. Like, I'm never going to be able to do this. I always fail at these things. I just don't know that and unfortunately, right, the best indicator of future performance is past performance. So people just have this, encyclopedia of I just can't do it. And so, bit by bit, easy by slowly, when people start to do these loving and esteemable things like break up with sugar, like, and for me, a big part of the of the relationship piece is the imperfection of it. Is I always say to people, like, I don't think there's a chance you're giving up sugar for the rest of your life. It's not if you're going to mess this thing up, like you're messing this thing up. And diet culture never teaches us what to do about that, ever. And so I think that idea too, that exposure to imperfection plus like this idea that like I'm doing really good things for myself with consistency, like I'm loving myself enough to be consistent, like it's unavoidable that you're going to start to think, oh wait, maybe I'm like not as bad as I thought I was, right? And like, oh wait, like maybe I could do other things. Like, I've just watched people like heal marriages, get better jobs, try new, it's amazing the ripple effect of, like, in the addictions world they say that relapse is a progressive is really progressive, right? It's a progressive illness, but I think recovery is also a progressive thing too, right? You get a little healthier, a little healthier, a little, and like, I think people wake up and they're like, oh my God, I don't hate myself anymore. Like, what happened?
And just the power that comes with that, until you realize it for yourself, until you experience it for yourself, I don't think we can fathom the power, the empowerment really that comes with that. I mean, because that is not only just finally liking or being in alignment with your food choices, your lifestyle choices, that is you finally feeling empowered and feeling in control of your life. And for some people, I'm hearing for the first time ever, for the first time in a long time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's really right. And I think the other thing is, and like, listen, I'm a therapist by trade. I think to try to think your way into that is possible, right? Self-affirming. I love a good self-affirming mantra. I love all that stuff. I love journaling, but like really doing things, like really doing things, I think just gets you there a bit quicker. And I think the other piece that I've seen that maybe is the most miraculous of all of it is, like, eating a cookie and getting back on track. might be the greatest act of self-forgiveness that exists, right? Like, and it never occurs to anybody like, oh, wait, I can just stop right here. I remember that happened to me. Like, I took like a handful of almonds from my secretary's desk a long time ago. And like, obviously, my first response was like, okay, so cool. Like, froyo next? Like, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? Right. I was like, and I
Bring
just
on
had
round
this,
two.
yeah, you're like, so what are we like mac and cheese? Like, where are we going here? And I just remember I had this like little intuitive thought, like, you could just go have lunch. Like this doesn't have to be an episode. Like this can just be a blip on the screen. I use this analogy like it's like we get with diet cultures, like we get the flat tire in our car and we get out of the car, we check out the flat tire, we get a knife out of our pocket and we slice all the tires, torch the car and leave it on the
We got
highway.
one down, we might as well just burn the whole mother
May as
down, you
well.
know?
I don't know. And I don't know. I still get I mean, it's 12 years later. I still get a little like psyched up, like, a little big binge there. Like, let's do it. But it's an
That's
amazing,
a
it's
very, very honest response. Thank you for that,
I'm nothing if I'm not honest.
yeah.
But I think, yeah, I think there's this piece that it's because there's such a simplicity to what I'm saying, right? But I think in action, and I've just seen it with people, they're like, I didn't slash all the tires, like, and to because you know what comes with that, right? That demoralization, that hopelessness, and I think that reaffirming that you can't do it. Back to your question about like why does it impact your relationship with yourself? Like talk about taking back your power. Talk about rewriting a story. It's like, yeah, like one cookie doesn't have to define my entire relationship with food. Like it's a cookie, chill.
I wanna, if I could, have you share some insights on just why sugar is such a slippery slope. What is it doing? If you could share maybe some like, here are some scientific evidence, here are some biomarkers, here are some we touched on some things earlier in terms of inflammation and kind of being a trigger for some people when it comes to eating disorders, disordered eating. But let's talk sugar. Let's get specific about sugar. What is going on with this mofo? Why does it just love to just keep us coming back for more? And what is it doing to our bodies?
So my favorite, there's a lot of things. Gosh, my head might explode. So I hope we don't show too
Pick,
much.
pick a couple of your favorites.
And I hope we're editing because I really like did you see what just happened to me? I was like,
She had a moment, everybody. She had a
well,
moment.
then that's a beautiful thing, right? Because I'm not like, uh-oh, how do I answer this question? I'm like, there's too much I want to talk about right now with regards to all of this. So, I think the thing that's really interesting, and listen, I mean, not everybody believes that sugar is addictive. I just don't know anybody that believes it's good for you. You know what I mean? Well, there's just, I mean, there's so when I think about if you're willing to expand your mind for a minute and think about sugar as an addiction, there's a lot of people who just I say that word and they just like balk at it, right? But I want to say it looks so good now. But I want to say in this new world, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, like even if you struggle with an addiction, abstinence isn't necessarily the only answer to recovery from an addiction. I mean, the sober curious movement has really shown us that, right? And self determination has shown us that too. So, if you don't mind me extending that for a minute, the thing that really fascinates me about sugar addiction is that it's a four-pronged illness. And that I think isn't in and of itself is a big piece of it, right? So something like alcohol is a substance addiction, right? So it means you ingest it and it impacts your nervous system, right? It impacts your brain, your dopamine receptors, all of those pretty fun brain words. And something like a gambling addiction is what you call a process addiction, right? But that too only impacts your nervous system. Like, so what's really interesting about sugar is it's four-pronged, right? So obviously it's a substance, right? And when it comes into your body, it cues up your dopamine, and we know that you have to, for many people, like one cookie won't do, and we need more cookies to get the same high. And even in many ways, we get resistant, right? Like I know so many people who are big into artificial sweeteners and their dopamine levels have gotten so resistant that nothing even tastes good. The high, you can't get it the same way, right? So we could talk about that artificial sweeteners all day. So that's a really interesting piece, right? So here's the other piece, which is it's also a process addiction, right? When you think about over consuming, binging is a thing, hand to mouth, right? That's a process addiction like gambling. And the thing about sugar is I don't actually think the dopamine part is the most interesting, although it's very interesting that it does similar things like cocaine or alcohol. What I think is most interesting is that it impacts your endocrine system, right? And so it impacts your liver and your pancreas, like all the really important things that get your metabolism moving, your gut health, and all of this. And what we're seeing in people, which is perhaps the most fascinating to me, is that people are starting to have liver problems as a function of eating food, to where there is a diagnosis now called non alcoholic fatty liver syndrome. What happens when you eat fructose? Fructose is fruit juice. This is people just think fruit juices. Fructose is alcohol without the buzz, right? Because it does the same exact thing that alcohol
Wow.
does in your body, which
Wow.
means
Yeah,
that
apparently.
it isn't processed. Fructose isn't processed in your body, which means it chills out in your bloodstream, turns to fat, and goes right to your liver. And so we're seeing non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome in kids. In kids. So people who are intuitive eating people, like, they can talk all they want. They don't like believe in food addiction. Like, I can't even get involved in that conversation because big food in and of itself, like, there's a beautiful book called Hooked by Michael Moss, and he was on my podcast, and he's great because he's like a researcher. He's a journalist. He's like, I would have said before I started this book, like, you're really extending there by saying like sugar's addictive. He's like, absolutely. We are up against so much just from culturally. And then if you take other vulnerabilities like trauma, like past history of eating disorders, like polycystic ovarian syndrome, and all of these functional problems that many of us struggle with. And the thing is, as a woman in the culture and this, in the patriarchy of it all, like, I was put on a diet at 7. And what's really interesting too about the binge restrict cycle is that it really compromises your ability to process insulin. It makes you insulin resistant. So, right. So people will come to me and say, "Well, I don't have any, my endocrinologist says, like, I'm okay." And I'm like, "Listen, if you're binging and restricting, it's a compromised system. Your pancreas is just not a fan. And you have to be learning how to eat in a way that's going to make your body function optimally." I'm actually not even talking about weight loss or biohacking. I have a lot of problems with intermittent fasting and all of that, mostly because I'm an eating disorders therapist and an addictions therapist. And
Okay.
I,
Okay.
I think all of
Wow.
these things can turn into eating disorders in a really big way. I'm also a shaman, and so I believe, like, in the deeply in the spiritual piece of this, right? And I think
I
eating
love that.
disorders co-opt our souls and do not allow for us to actually be useful. It's a full-time job having an eating disorder and an obsession, or an orthorexic obsession with food. So, I mean, I just have a lot to say about all of
I love that. I love that. So a couple things come up there. I definitely would love to get into kind of the spiritual aspect you're talking about,
that.
because I
Oh, okay.
think whether or not we claim to be spiritual, we have a spiritual component to our total wellness, I believe. But
Or we
before we
need
get
to.
there, say again,
Or we need to,
or we need to, yes, yeah. But
period.
before we get into the spiritual aspect, we've been saying some phrases, some words that I want to kind of really drive home, and that's eating disorder,
Mm,
disordered eating,
mhm.
and in this episode of yours I was listening to, it really kind of stuck out to me. Something that I really agree with that I don't know if everybody is fully aware of, and that is it's not just one thing that triggers or causes an eating disorder. We're talking about kind of this compound effect, and how sometimes when the eating disorder or disordered eating habit starts for the very first time, or we kind of have a relapse, it's very rare when it's just that predecessor, that thing we were doing right
Oh,
before, the conversation
yeah.
right before. Can you talk to us about this kind of compound effect of disordered eating and eating disorders?
Yeah, I mean, it's, eating disorders and addictions, I think, are perfect storms in many ways. One of my mentors says, there's the nature of the person, the nature of the environment, and the nature of the substance. And, when those three things come together, a lot of the time you get the pathology. I always, this question always brings up this other thing for me, because I think what we're doing in this moment is relying on the diagnostic and statistical manual to inform people of things. And I think that particular Bible in my industry is very flawed. It's very flawed with what we're talking about here, right? Because they don't really think binge eating is such a big deal in that manual. right? Because in my opinion, it's like it's the lethality of it is really an extended release suicide, right? Like versus anorexia and bulimia, which is, you can die on a thing, right? So the immediacy of wanting to deal with things and not listen, I've treated plenty of all of them, right? I think I just want to explain. I always worry that somebody's listening and saying, well, I don't fit criteria for any of them. So maybe I don't deserve help or maybe I don't need help. And it's like, there's one called eating disorder NOS, not otherwise specified, right? And it's like, if you're struggling in your relationship with food, you deserve help. Let's
Also, no matter what, I think we all deserve help
oh,
in anything we're working on in our life. We should ask for help. We all need it. We all deserve it,
I'm
and
here for
we should want it more.
I'm here. I think, but honestly, Chase, I think that's the bind, right? I don't
Hmm.
think I
Hmm.
deserve it, so I don't want it. Like that's the it's like we're all just trapped in these cages thinking we should just be able to muscle through it. We don't want to get the right treatment. We don't want to pay for it. We don't know where it is. We're getting the wrong advice because we're taking it from these people who are just having good personal stories. It's tricky out
We
there.
deserve help, and we are worthy of help. I'll say.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. And even for like it doesn't have to be a big raging eating disorder. I think that's my story, but like wow, I mean, I wish I didn't have to wait till I was eating my way through bariatric surgery to say, wow, maybe I need to take this a little bit more seriously, you know?
Which I think is a perfect kind of transition into the spiritual component you were talking about. Right there, I think it brings up the concept of the emotional eating, the emotions that are tied to so many decisions in our life, but damn sure when it comes to our eating habits. How is the spiritual component, or what is the spiritual component to our nutrition, and how is it any different, or is it like a step beyond the emotional component? What's going on here?
I think it's a step beyond. I mean, I think about spirituality in a few ways. I mean, I think of it as a belief system in many ways. As like, you know, what is the belief system that's going to be are going to be my governing principles, right? In many ways. And so people will say, well, I don't believe in God and I don't believe in this. And it's like, yeah, me too, kind of, like that's not the point. The point is about the lower self and the higher self, right? And when we're enmeshed and ingrained, and it doesn't in obsession of food, obsession of body, all of that, it's like it's just a really crappy thing to pray to every day. It's a really crappy governing force when there's so much bigger and better and more expansive above that, even if it's service and peace and love and it's all going to be okay and in this moment everything, there's a lot of higher level things that we're praying to something no matter what. We're always praying to something. We're always praying to some kind of deity. I think the piece of the food and the sugar, it's like, listen, in my experience, when I was deep in this thing, I would be sitting here with you thinking, okay, well, I hope I'm doing this well, and I'm not sure I'm doing this well. And the minute we're done with this, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get this thing because I need to numb myself, right? Right. So that's taking me away from the present moment, right? In my higher self life, which is like, hey, it's like not really up to me. I'm going to show up. I'm going to do my best. It's going to be fun, and I'm going to leave the rest. Those are my spiritual values, right? It's such an easier way to live because it's like the smallness and the postage stamp and the self responsibility and the thinking I'm in charge of everything. I mean, leads a girl to want to go bend your brains out. You know what I mean? So there's this higher self, lower self part. But if you're deep in obsession with food and you don't think that that's your spiritual practice right now, you're out of your mind. You know?
I love your interpretation there of the lower self and higher self. I think it's probably one of the best ways and one of my favorite ways I've heard spirituality described, or our spiritual self, because more often than not, we tend to we go to, oh, what do I believe in? My
Yeah.
religion, my deity, who I pray to, how I pray. It's kind of like the acts of spirituality versus the range, the spectrum, the self spectrum, or rather the spectrum of the self, I think in spirituality that you said so eloquently.
Well, I'm trained in a kind of therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy,
Hmm.
and
What is that?
it's a Zen based treatment. It's actually for the treatment of borderline personality disorder and all very serious disorders. It's very well researched, and it's about finding a balance between validation and change. It's really about the answer never being the opposite, the answer always being the balance. And one of the core beliefs in the treatment, and the treatment was made by a woman who's a Zen Buddhist master, and she calls it the wise mind, and what she really says, and I believe this wholeheartedly, that like everybody has a deep internal wisdom inside. And that's spirituality, right? It's so because I agree with you, like giving all of our power away. I mean, listen, I have my own deities, I have my own belief systems. I don't even want anybody knowing about it because I want people to decide all this for themselves, which is what the wise mind is about, right?
Wow, I
We
like
all
that.
have a knowing. We all have a gut. We all have that thing. The problem is that disordered eating, obsession with food puts that in the ICU. And sugar addiction absolutely puts it in the ICU. You can't find your intuition when you're deep in an addiction. They're just the addiction will always be louder than the intuition. That's why you got to put those sorts of things into remission so you can tap into the truest part of yourself. It's all in there, you know?
I feel like that is going to be what we'll talk about in part two. I can tell I would love to have you back in the future. The whole spiritual component of our behavior, of behavior change, of our lifestyle, our diet, our
Yeah.
relationships. There's something special there.
Well, I always say
Um,
this thing, Chase, which is it's like once you know what works for you with the food, the rest really is about trying to stay in your wise mind. You know what I mean?
hell
Like,
yeah, hell yeah.
and there's no binging in your wise mind, is what's true, right? If I'm really living in my highest self, like you can pass me those cookies and I know they don't work for me, and like it's not an issue. It's about when I'm spiritually unsound, I need something to,
Yeah,
numb
yes.
me and bring me down and bring me to that safe place of lower self that I know so well. I could talk about it all day. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. What you're describing is kind of like I get this. I'm not even a big Star Wars fan, but I imagine just kind of having that Jedi master mindset of just
Believe it.
this doesn't serve me, and
Yeah.
there's no battle. It's not even a question. You just look at it, and there's a knowing, this
Yeah.
internal knowing of yes or no.
That's my whole life. I'm like, people are like, "How do you do it?" I'm like, "It's just not my food." Like,
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
even that personal. It's just not. I'm like, "That doesn't work with me." Like, I don't crave it because it doesn't work. Not my food. Not my food. That's my big thing. Not my food.
Well, I want to get back to a question here, kind of wrapping up this whole diet aspect. You talked about how the cost of diet, and particularly diet failure, is
Mm.
high. And I think this is something where people don't fully realize y- it's not like putting the cart before the horse. It's people are getting the horse and they don't realize, there's a cart, there's another component. When you embark down a diet, you're either going to be successful or not. You're either going to maintain it or not. And it's that not part, the diet failure, that, if I understand correctly, you believe is just too high of a cost for people when it comes to trying to just keep up a diet all the damn time.
Oh, I mean, and I think it just for whatever it's worth, like it comes at a cost to your endocrine system too. Like it comes at a cost to your belief in yourself. It comes at a cost to your core beliefs. Like, it comes at a cost of trying to get up again and do the thing again and the shame of it all. But there's actually a lot of like endocrine research that supports how that's like why when people like I'll say to people, if you don't change your beliefs, breaking up with sugar is just a diet. And I'm supported by a billion coaches and not coaches saying, like, let's do a 7-day cleanse. It's like day 8. Like then what? Right? Like
And what? Yeah.
and the problem is on day 8, people are like, yeah, donuts. And then we're back in that terrible demoralized cycle again until the next minute that your pants don't fit or you have that moment of grace where you can say something, I really need help. It's like this is just so unnecessary in many ways, like,
Truly.
except
Yeah.
research moment, the research really supports we get an incredible high from restricting, incredible high. And it also is a cue for many of us, a cue to our brain the minute we restrict that our brain knows it's going to be getting a reward of binging later. I mean,
It's just like, it's
there's
like
some messy brain science
hold,
to all of it.
hold,
Yeah.
wait for it, wait for it,
Mm.
wait for it. Then the
Yeah.
floodgates.
Yeah, my brain's like, "Don't eat breakfast. Let's not do." Yeah, skip lunch. Can't wait for 11 p.m., right?
Well, this has been an incredible conversation around, I mean, really diving into just the emotional side, the spiritual side of our nutrition choices, our diet, this kind of bad guy in diet culture, sugar. It's just we, the data is there, the personal experience is there, and I love your point really of just I don't think we'll find anyone who will say sugar is good for you
Yeah,
or we're
all,
focused on
all
hating
all
it.
sugar diet. I mean, count me in. Like, I'll go clean prisons. Like, I'm fine. Like, if that data comes out, count me in on it. Like, 100%. It's just, it's toxic, and I think we're just, listen, like, it's a lot of people's solution, so we don't want to think it's a problem. I mean, that means we have to change how we do birthday parties. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
shift.
It's a lifestyle really, and
Yeah.
it's part of our culture, it's part of our community, it's part of how we're raised, and
Mhm.
I mean that's the whole multifacetedness, the onion layers that is us, that is our diet, that is why we do what we do and how. There's so many other components here, and it's just a kind of understanding and chipping away at all of them until we can
Yeah.
decide and get in that empowered state like we were talking about earlier.
I just want to say too, like, in my lifetime, I never thought that I wouldn't eat sugar anymore, right? It's just like that the benefits so outweigh the giving up of it. It's and I think that it's not, I don't just feel this way. Like, I have a Facebook group with thousands of, I just, there's so many people I know that are, and it's like alcohol in that way. And I think sugar is very like alcohol, just in a non-abstinent way, like where there's people who can absolutely use it recreationally, as recreational drugs are supposed to be used. And there's some people, like, I have a godson who's like, has 3 bites. He's like, I'm good. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Can't
And there's some
relate.
of us who can't recreationally
Yeah.
use it responsibly, and it has either emotional, physical, spiritual, or all three effects on us. And, mostly eliminating it is usually the answer. Just, you can never know. It's like, that's the hold that sugar has on you. It's like, don't give it
Uh-huh.
up. You'll die.
Exactly.
What are you going to do at the party? You know?
What's it gonna be, son,
Yeah, what's
huh?
it going to be,
What's it
son?
gonna be?
Right?
Make a move. Make your first
Yeah,
move.
come on, man. Come on, try it. Uh-huh.
Well, understanding these things in our life, in our communities, in our lifestyle, in our diet, and then becoming more educated about them, and then becoming more empowered, and then taking action on them is what I talk about here on the show. And this is what I mean when I say moving forward in life, living a life ever forward.
Absolutely.
But I always am curious, what does that mean to my guests after we've been talking about some really amazing components here to our nutrition and to our life? Um, Living a life ever forward. What does that mean to you? How does that fall on you here today?
I would say for me, it's oh, I believe I'm a seeker in a big way. And so I believe it's like my job in life is to keep the most open mind that exists. And when I watch myself shut down and say, no, no, it's almost my cue to open bigger, right? Because there's something going on within me that's saying, like, that's shutting down, that's getting closed minded. I think for me, having an open mind about everything. And listen, in our worlds right now, that's like what we all need, that othering and the toxic tribalism in every area, including diet culture. I think it's always about staying open, because when my vision is 180, I can see a lot more possibilities and miracles and hope and help than when my vision is at like a 1%. And I'm like, no, it has to be this one way. So I think that's what moving forward means to me, is just trying to keep as open a mind as possible.
Keeping 180 vision. I like that. I
Yeah.
like that. I'm going to take that. I like that interpretation. Thank you so much. Um, well, Molly, it's been my pleasure. I'll kill the interview there, and we'll have an amazing piece to share out. Shout out Scarlett for introducing us
Oh,
here.
love
Been
Scarlett.
loving her and the whole team, and products and everything over at Sugar Break.
Yeah.
So we're
Those are
gonna.
really game changing products, by the way.
That was amazing. I no no shame here. I I every once in a while I'll crush a pizza. Like pizza is my weakness, and it's just my thing. Large pizza, no problem.
Yeah.
And I
You're
took
in good
sugar break,
company, Case.
huh?
You're in good company.
I could tell. I could tell. And I took sugar break before, and I was using a continuous glucose monitor at the time, levels, and my peak glucose after eating an entire large pizza was about 112.
Wow. Well, do you have any knowledge about what it is when you didn't have the sugar break in you? Have you ever done a continuous glucose while you ate a
I've used a CGM like 3 times now this year, so I guess a total of 3 months, and I do have the data to go back and look.
Pretty
But
fascinating. good.
for the sake of science, next time I will eat a pizza
Will
without
you?
sugar break and then eat another pizza the next day if I have to fall on that sword,
You're
I
such a
guess.
good
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah.
Um,
But I
yeah,
mean,
that's
just
I mean,
hundreds and hundreds of grams of carbs. I mean, I would assume I would have to be, approaching 200, if not
yeah,
even more. Yeah.
I would say that. Yeah, no, I think it's and I think even just giving that the the tongue strip is like an amazing thing of just being able to get a few extra moments to say no, I don't want to do that. It's really amazing.
Wow. That
Sometimes just
interpretation
need
is
a minute,
amazing.
you know?
Sometimes to make the best decision, really just to make any decision in our life, if we had an ability just to insert a couple moments, that's profound. Yeah.
That's what I say about there's every spiritual practice in the whole world says one thing consistently, and that's the thing all spiritual practices say. Just wait a minute. Wait until you hear what to do. Like there's no spiritual practice that says react, you know?
Yeah. Are you familiar with the author Ryan Holiday?
No, should I be? Go then.
Oh my goodness. Actually, I got one of his books behind me right here. My favorite book that I think every human being in the world should read. It's called Ego is the Enemy.
Great, I'm on it.
He a book that came out, I think it was last year, called Stillness is the Key. It's really that. It's just the power of inserting stillness,
Yeah.
and just its profound mental,
Yeah. I'm a
physical,
big
emotional
meditator, are
benefits.
you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I have a very regimented meditation practice, but my meditation comes in different forms. I
Yeah.
insert stillness throughout my day and my weeks, to kind of that's my meditation
No,
basically.
I love
Yeah.
it. No, you can tell how my meditation practice is by how reactive I am for sure. I'm just a pretty high maintenance gal and spiritually, so that's how it
Hey,
goes for me.
you know thyself, right? Uh,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
um, well, Molly, you're amazing. Your energy was amazing.
Thank you.
Your insight and expertise was very
What a
appreciated.
great
Thank you.
conversation. I love when things are easy. That's one of my words for 2021. Easy, fun, abundant. This was so easy. What a treat. Thank you.
My pleasure. And we're